influence, authority, and legitimacy. Introduction. You were told in our first study session that power, influence, and authority are the central organizing concepts of the study of politics. In this study session, much emphasis will be on these interrelated concepts. The meaning of each concept and the differences between the concepts will be demonstrated with illustrations. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to explain the concepts of power, influence, authority, and legitimacy as the central issues of politics, and distinguish between these concepts of politics. The central organizing concepts of politics. Power, influence, authority, and legitimacy are common terminologies in political analysis. Even most of the definitions of politics given by scholars, some of which were given in study session 1, emphasize these concepts. Specifically speaking, some defined politics as the quest for power, and let me remind you of Harold Laswell's definition of politics as who gets what, when, and how, which focuses on power. The concepts of power, influence, and authority express relationships among political actors, and the distinction that could be made between these concepts is only in the extent of variance in the form of relationship. These concepts are generic terms, and hence Robert Dahl used influence and related concepts such as control, persuasion, might, force, and coercion to explain them all. Often, we heard of terms like physical power, military power, economic power, political power, presidential power, judicial power, and national power. Dahl sees power as the product of human relationships. A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that he would not otherwise do. A person may be said to have power to the extent he influences the behavior of others in accordance with his intentions. Max Weber's definition of power indicates that power involves the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance. To most political thinkers, politics is all about power and influence. Thus, Harold Laswell and Abraham Kaplan see politics as the shaping, distribution, and exercise of power. Power is bilateral as well as relational. It is exercised with respect to others. For there to be a leader, there must be followers. What is political power? According to Max Weber, power is the responsibility of imposing one's will upon the behavior of other persons. To him, power involves domination, that is, a reciprocal relationship between the rulers and the ruled, in which the actual frequency of compliance is only one aspect of the fact that the power of command exists. Carl Friedrich sees power as the capacity of an individual or group of individuals to modify the conduct of others in the manner which he desires. From the above definition, it is clear that political power is a social power. It is exercised over man, not over nature or things. Power is the ability to get things done, to make others do what we want, even when they do not want to do it. There are three major terms that can be identified with the term power. These are force, domination, and manipulation. Force. This is the physical manipulation of the subordinated individual. The exercise of force can be assault, confinement, etc. Domination. This is an influence on the behavior of a person by making it explicit to others what he wants them to do, that is, command, request, etc. To Max Weber, domination is identical with authoritarian power of command. For domination to be present, there must be 1. An individual who rules or a group of rulers. 2. An individual who is ruled or group of people ruled. 3. The will of the rulers to influence the conduct of the ruled, an expression of that will, that is, through command. 4. Evidence of the influence of the rulers in terms of the objective degree of compliance with command. 5. Direct or indirect evidence of that influence in terms of the objective acceptance with which the ruled obey the command. Manipulation. This is another form of power obtained when an actor influences the behavior of others without making explicit the behavior which he wants them to display. Manipulation may be exercised by utilizing symbols of performing acts. Propaganda is a major form of manipulation by symbols. Influence. When a relationship is devoid of sanctions, coercion, and physical force, there is said to be a relationship of influence. The distinction between power and influence can only be made in terms of the form of relationship among persons. While it will be correct to assert that power relationship connotes influence, relationship based on influence, on the other hand, does not connote the use of force, which is synonymous with power. However, both concepts express relationship between two persons, for instance, person A and person B. It should be noted that power and influence are inseparable concepts. According to Robert Dahl, influence is a relation among actors such that the wants, desires, preferences, or intentions of one or more actors affect the actions or predispositions to act of one or more other actors. One person has influence over another within a given scope to the extent that the first, without resorting to either tactic or an overt threat of severe deprivations, causes the second to change his course of action. The exercise of power depends upon potential sanction, while the exercise of influence does not. Influence can be classified into two broad categories, though it takes several forms. 1. Manifest or explicit influence. 2. Potential or implicit influence. Manifest or explicit influence is an influence exercised by A over B to the extent that A's action causes a change in B's behavior. B is able to anticipate A's wants and B complies accordingly. Potential or implicit influence is an indirect or unknown influence by the influencer. Example, the National Assembly tries to make a law on a subject and putting different groups into consideration and considering alternatives before they will eventually make the law that favors a particular group. This group may be said to have a potential or implicit influence on the decision of the National Assembly. Question: when a relationship is devoid of sanctions, coercion, and physical force, there is said to be a relationship of 1. Influence. 2. Power. 3. Manipulation. 4. Domination. Feedback on the question. The correct answer is A. If you choose B, then it will be incorrect because power entails the use of sanctions, coercions, or physical force. If you chose C, it would also be incorrect because manipulation is another form of power obtained when an actor influences the behavior of others without making explicit the behavior which he wants them to display. If you chose D, then you are incorrect because, according to Max Weber, domination is identical with authoritarian power of command. Authority. Authority is a form of power. Perhaps it could be described as a superior form of power. Authority is the quality of being able to get people to do things because they think the individual has the right to tell them what to do. Those in authority are followed because it is believed that they will fulfill a need within the community or political system. Authority is linked with respect, which creates legitimacy and therefore leads to power. Authority is a form of power. Thus, authority has been described as legitimate power. Max Weber identified 3 types of authority, which are 1. Traditional authority, 2. Charismatic authority, and 3. Legal authority. Traditional authority. This authority rests on the sanctity of tradition in conventional usage, in which prevailing social order is seen as inviolable or sacred. This takes the form of respect for the monarch or chief. Traditional authority is legitimate in the sense that it is in accordance with the custom and tradition of the people. Charismatic authority. This authority is exercised because of the belief in the personal qualities of a particular person, that is, the charisma of a person. The power of command may be exercised by a leader when he possesses extraordinary gifts or personal attributes. Persons who obey such a leader are called followers or disciples. Examples of such leaders are Obafemi Awolowo, Indira Gandhi, Adolf Hitler, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Nelson Mandela, etc. Legal authority. This authority is legitimated by the supremacy of the law, meaning that the exercise of law is accepted as legitimate because all subscribe to existing rules, regulations, laws, and policies of the land. The laws subscribed to are seen as constitutional and in line with the political culture of the people. Question. Political authority refers to 1. The electorate, 2. The right to influence the attitude and conduct of others, 3. The power one exercises as a result of complete ownership of the means of production and distribution, 4. The right to influence the election of representatives of the people. Feedback on the question. The correct answer is B. If you chose A, then you would have stated that the electorate can also be called political authority. If you chose C, then you will be making reference to economic power and not political authority. If you chose D, then you are making reference to election rigging. Legitimacy. In order to understand what is meant by legitimacy, one needs to look at different definitions of legitimacy and their differences in detail. USIM refers to state legitimacy as the widespread public belief that the society's governing institutions and political authorities are worthy of support, is commonly held to be a precondition for political stability in advanced capitalist democracies. Betham, in his attempts to define legitimacy, argues that where power is acquired and exercised according to justifiable rules and with evidence of consent, we call it rightful or legitimate. Another way to approach this problem of conceptualization is to define what illegitimate means and therefore reason what legitimate means. Rothberg, for example, argues that an illegitimate state is a state with broken and corrupt state institutions. This approach does not seem to be reasonable because, in reverse, this definition would imply that a state is legitimate only when its institutions are not corrupt or broken. This definition lacks a moral element. Weber argues that legitimacy arises out of the confidence of the ruled. This definition also lacks a sufficient moral element. From the foregoing, legitimacy denotes the belief in the rightness of an individual to make authoritative and binding decisions. It is the belief in the right to govern and to be governed. Legitimacy refers to an attitude in people's mind, in some countries strong, in others weak, that the government rule is rightful. Through it, power is translated to authority. When the government is perceived to be dishonest and dirty, people feel less obliged to obey laws which can lead to the erosion of legitimacy of the government of the day. Government is seen as legitimate when its rules and decisions are respected and obeyed. To get citizens' approval of its policies and programs, government in most cases follows public opinion. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned that power, influence, authority, and legitimacy are central concepts in political analysis. Although people erroneously make use of them interchangeably, they connote different meanings. Generally speaking, power is the ability to get things done, to make others do what we want, even if they do not want to do it. Power is relational and bilateral. Authority is a form of power derived from approved procedure of the political culture, which enables the political office holder to act in certain ways that will affect the behavior of others. You were told in the study session that when a relationship is devoid of sanctions, coercion, and physical force, there is said to be a relationship of influence. In essence, therefore, the distinction between power and influence can only be made in terms of the form of relationship among persons. It is through legitimacy, which denotes rightness or acceptance, that power and influence can be translated into authority. Max Weber categorized types of authority into three, namely charismatic, legal, rational, and traditional. End of study session 5. Thanks for listening.